Hello, everyone. I think we are all set up and ready to go. So it's good to be here today. I'm Dan Hamilton. I'm a Marine Corps veteran and host of the Next Gen Warrior Show. We are so happy to be a part of the Spring 2021 Employing U.S. Vets Virtual Spring Conference. And thank you for being a part of our breakout panel on starting a veterans program from scratch. The experts that are going to be joining me today are Brandon Armstrong, Early Careers Lead at BP, Eddie Dunn, President and CEO of Eddie Dunn Consulting, Robyn Grable, Founder and CEO of Veterans Ascend, and Mr. David F. Wallace, Senior Manager at Systematic Business Consulting. It's great to have you all here. I know you guys have a ton of insight and experience on not only founding, but managing veterans programs. And Eddie, if you don't mind, I'm going to start out with you today, and then we'll kind of kick it around the room here. But something that I think you have done so well throughout your career, Eddie, is setting expectations for the veterans program that you are starting and then exceeding those expectations. So if you can talk to me a little bit about, in the audience, can you give us some anecdotal evidence on how you set expectations and then how you went about exceeding those when you started a veterans program?
Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me, and it's great to be here. So first and foremost, when I'm dealing with a brand new client and or any type of company I'm working for or working with, it always starts with the baseline of data, and it's always the business value built around that piece there as the first layer foundation. Second piece for us is understanding the executive sponsorship and how that aligns and integrates into what those expectations will be. And we can get into a lot of different areas of opportunity. I'm sure my colleagues will speak more about that as well. But setting those expectations around there, the first part of this is getting the early wins, building the momentum around where you can get the early wins at, working multiple executive sponsors at different times, different places. And that's really the start. But the first part of that is building those relationships. It's fundamentally the talent strategy has to be put in place. And that's typically around what I would call a train to hire retain model, built around a full cycle employment life cycle. And so that's the core of how I go about that fundamentally.
David, let me pivot to you real quick, because something that Eddie touched on that I think is incredibly important is executive buy-in. Can you talk to us about the executive buy-in that you've had at Systematic Business Consulting, and how, if you are starting a veterans program from scratch, how important that has been for you to have the senior leadership in your business want to hire veterans because it is good business?
Thank you, Dan. Great question, and same thing that Eddie said. Really appreciate being part of this panel. The executive buy-in is important. I work directly for the president of the company, so he and I have sat when he hired me for this position. It was talking about his vision, talking about what he wanted to do, how he wanted to utilize and bring about the military program to expand the business. The big thing was, talking about SkillBridge being the number one contributing factor to help grow internally. So it really is being able to get to understand all the nuances of what your executive leadership wants. It's basically going back to the very basics of what any recruiter had done and that would do, seek first to understand, then be understood. Be the empathic listener to truly understand what your executive leadership wants, get the clarity from there, and then provide your ideas. And the more that they get to listening and liking what you're saying, the better it's actually going to be. Because you've got to be on the same page. You have to be able to both be speaking the same language and make sure that there's nothing that's being missed in the process. So communication is key.
Yeah, and if Eddie, I can go back to you to dig into something you mentioned a little bit deeper. Starting a veterans program is good business because veterans can grow the value in your company. If somebody that you worked with in the past, maybe you had to sell this idea about veterans being good in the boardroom, or veterans being good on the floor, or veterans being good salesmen, or whatever it might be. How did you discuss this veterans program being actually beneficial for the bottom line of the company?
Yeah. And so very specifically, there's the value proposition built about the impact. So there has to be, you have to get your talent strategy aligned to the business strategy. That's very fundamental, right? So what do I mean by that? So I'll give you a very crisp example. I was working for a Fortune 500 company, and they were bidding work. They were a Fortune 500 consulting organization, and they were looking, and one of their RFPs was built around, what are you doing for veteran employment? And so we were able to add very specific value based on building a #1 military-friendly program, and they ended up getting a multi-million-dollar contract. So that's a very crisp example, but it can be very interesting. The aggregate of veteran employment, very specific to an area like supply chain, for example, and the excellence built around that, were tailor-made for that. They're anecdotal evidence, but that direct line talent strategy aligned and integrated into the business strategy, very key.
So Robyn and Brandon, I have an interesting, I think, a juxtaposition between both of you all, and I think it's important to kind of bring this out. And if you'll allow me to kind of set the stage, Robyn, you described on our call prior to us jumping on today about Veterans Ascend kind of being like an eHarmony for employers and for employees. I hope I got that correctly. And Brandon, you're working at BP. You have a larger leadership structure. You have maybe more red tape around you. It's a different corporate environment that Robyn is working in, as she went out and founded the program that you're working in right now. So I want to hear, Robyn, kind of what starting a veterans program from scratch on your own has taught you. And then Brandon, I was interested if you could provide us maybe some anecdotal evidence on what it's like starting a veterans program in a more corporate environment. And Robyn, if you don't mind going first.
Absolutely. Well, as David and Eddie both said, I'm honored to be here. So thank you very much. Just I want to touch on something that they talked about, but the support from the executives top down has to be there for a program to be successful. And that is because, as Eddie mentioned, you got to tie in all of the goals of the organization. And if you don't have the support that your talent acquisition fits into the goals of the organization, you're not going to get these programs started. So as a Navy veteran, I certainly experienced my own transition out of the military and trying to understand what my skills were, how I could take that to a different industry, how I could take that to a different company. And so I ended up in HR, spent the last 30 years in HR, and the last 6 back in the military fold of studying military hiring. We created Veterans Ascend because of the barriers to get to an interview. The barriers of translating skills, aligning those skills to a new occupation, to an employer, and an employer that's really intentionally hiring veterans. So starting it from scratch in my world was actually easy, obviously, because it's my company and it's what we're all about. We're all about veterans and military spouse programs. But I think that in my HR experience, it's about understanding why you want to hire veterans. There's plenty of studies out there that will tell you the ROI, the return on investment, that helps your company save hiring costs. It'll help your revenue grow because more productivity, longevity, all of these things. So there's a lot of advantages out there, but starting it from scratch is really about understanding what you want to do with your company and how veterans can contribute to that.
Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Dan.
I thought I should have learned that in 2020. I thought we were past that at this point, but maybe not. Brandon, if you don't mind juxtaposing what your experience has been kind of in a form of the advice, because I think when we spoke, you talked about getting buy-in not just from senior leadership, but middle management as well. And I'm interested to see if you could expound on that a little bit more for us.
No, absolutely. And once again, thank you for allowing me to be part of this panel. as mentioned earlier, senior management is key, right? You need to kind of get their buy-in, their hearts and souls for the building out the strategy, right? If they're not bought into the strategy, then they won't be able to get cascaded down to those who are executing the strategy. So what I mentioned earlier in our call, I think a couple of weeks ago, Dan, is that if you really think about the way organization is structured, you have it's kind of like a pyramid, right? So you have your senior level leaders at the top, your executives, they make up a small percentage of the organization. If you think about their span of control, they're probably hiring about, I don't know, 1-2 people a year, if that. So a lot of the hiring and actually bringing in the veteran personnel will come from either middle management, first level supervisors, individual contributors, et cetera, right? So yes, you have the buy-in from the top, but most importantly, I think, or just as important, you need to get the buy-in from the middle management, those individuals who are actually making decisions around hiring. Because if they're not sold or bought into the process, then senior level executives, they can preach or scream from the mountaintop, we need to do this X, Y, and Z. But if they're not making hiring decisions, then it gets lost down in the food chain. So I think from an organization like the size of BP, part of it is around that buy-in, as well as who you bring with you along on the journey, right? So we also have ERGs, our business resourcing groups. One of them is our BP veterans group as well, to help us. I'll use the term evangelize, kind of the strategy, and also bring them a part of the journey when it comes to what are we doing? Because as a recruiter, I don't have a veteran background. I'm not prior military, so being able to translate resumes, being able to see, kind of read between the lines of what this resume is actually saying, or how to maybe talk to or speak with a veteran is always helpful. So bringing them along on the journey is also important.
Can you tell us about revitalizing the program there at BP? Because I think it's important for those in the audience. You know, if you work, in a state agency, if you work in a startup, if you work in an established business, everyone's experience with starting a veteran program will be a little bit different based on the ecosystem that they are in. So can you talk about the work that you're doing there at BP, and maybe some of the lessons learned over the last year while we're doing a lot of this virtually and trying to reach out to those either on military bases or to the veterans community across the nation?
No, good point. Good question. And so we're not 100% starting from scratch. Previously, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we did have an individual. She was our program manager, and she in a leading organization. So we weren't starting from scratch per se. But one thing we want to do is kind of get, recommitted to the veteran strategy. And that started from our senior level leaders. And when it comes to we have a diversity council, and the heads of our different entities are part of that diversity council. And then thing as well, when you want to translate it to business, that's where I think it really makes sense. Being that BP is a federal contractor, we have an obligation to bring in X percentage of veterans per year, right? Not just how many do we have on staff, but how many are we hiring. So that's a business case, and it makes sense for us to kind of, position ourselves to say this is a business case for that license to operate, I would say. So that was a part of it as well. And then another piece of kind of re-engaging the personnel is around looking at data, right? Where do we currently stand? And then also in looking at our data, where do most of our veterans, where they sit at within the organization? So if we're kind of building out our activities and building out our strategy, we know that we have corporate roles, we call them field-based roles or offshore or kind of your skilled trade roles. The majority of our veteran personnel sit in those field-based or those skilled trade type roles. Then we'll kind of build our strategy around. That's where we can get more, instant results when it comes to this strategy. And then once you get those results, it's easier to get more and more buy-in to help build programs and build initiatives toward that as well.
Yeah, David, if I can get you, maybe you and Robyn, or you and Eddie to jump in on this one after David goes. But Eddie mentioned something earlier at the beginning of the conversation about when you set expectations, you have to exceed those expectations, especially in the short term, right? Because you have to be able to show senior leadership, and you have to be able to show the people on the team that even with the short-term goals you're setting, you have to exceed those to show short-term progress that you can meet a long-term goal. I was wondering, from your perspective, David, were there times maybe when you didn't set expectations and you had to reroute your approach to building your program or growing your program? And maybe what were some of those lessons learned?
I think I'm in a unique position because the president of my company, who I work directly for, is a veteran. So the buy-in was there. His idea was to create this. He needed somebody that knew how to lead this opportunity. So the buy-in was actually there. It was more along the line of after learning about the opportunity, learning about what his vision was, seeing how large of an impact and how quickly it could happen. And within I came on board middle of November, and between middle of November and now, we've brought on 20 people, 15 through SkillBridge, 3 for 3 military spouses and 2 veterans. So, that impact itself keeps you busy, but it also, the joy of that part of that type of success is the original vision actually became doubled. Succeed, and guess what happens? Your goals go up, and that's a good thing to have. That means they want more because they see the success, because they see that value of a veteran that everybody talks about, and you see what the impact truly is. And we're just now really at the cusp of seeing all of that. Utilizing SkillBridge, the DoD SkillBridge program, for transitioning service members, utilizing that to build our employee base, to be the main factor of our employee base, is just something that really gives you that opportunity to see that. So I think I'm kind of at an advantage over some, but from my previous organization, I can say that the more layers you have, and Brandon could probably talk, nod his head with this, the more layers you have, the larger your company is, the more people you have to weave through to get an answer. I have a simple one. I make a phone call to my direct person. It's kind of easy, and he's like, okay. So I like that. So if you're working for a smaller company, great. Larger company, well, I used to have a full head of hair. So it's but it's fun. It's a great challenge to have because everybody can see the why. I just think it's easier when you have people that have served that understand. Not saying that others that have not don't understand, but you get an easier buy-in when you have somebody that's also served along with you.
Eddie, do you want to add any color to that? I know you mentioned earlier a little bit about setting expectations, but maybe touch on something either where you succeed or where you felt maybe a little short in the short term.
Well, what I'm seeing, what we're experiencing, it's a very astute question that you asked, Daniel, and it's around this. What I am seeing in the space right now, very specifically, is in a post-George Floyd era, there's a hyper focus on diversity and inclusion. And what I'm seeing, not just in any of my client work, but I'm seeing it across multiple industries and other people I talk to, that sometimes the military talent will take a back seat to that because of the hyper focus elsewhere. It's an unintended consequence of what's going on in the space right now. So the way to get around that is to show relevance to how our talent strategy, specifically in our contributions through SkillBridge, which is one of the best kept secrets on the planet right now. And third, how we contribute to that, to be relevant, is very specific. And if you can do that on a very deliberate pace and expertise and put your fingers on that, you'll be okay. But it's one of those things, if you don't see it early enough and press in to make sure that you're making that impact, you can lose relevance very quickly. So it's something I say to all practitioners, people who will listen, and shout it from the treetops, the mountaintops, but it's something to keep an eye out for sure.
And if
Robyn,
I can add a little something.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
If I can add a little something, when you're talking about D&I, what people really need to understand is that military recruiting is diversity and inclusion recruiting. For military.
A great call out, David. Great call out.
So,
yeah.
But
you need to remind them of that.
The master, of diversity, right? And when you look right and left in the military, you don't see male or female. You don't see ethnicity. You just see the person that's got your back, right? So Daniel, I wanted to add, I think one of the big misses that even large, especially large companies do, but small companies as well, find out who your veterans are already in your organization. I can't tell you how many employers I worked for who I answered, yes, I am a veteran on my application, never acknowledged it, never asked me to be part of anything. So organizations need to look internally first, find the veterans. Some of them may not disclose that they're veterans, but find the ones who are. Let them be part of starting a veteran program within the organization. Let them be part of helping your hiring managers and HR professionals understand military speak and what a resume looks like. But get them involved, because we love that as veterans. We want to help, right? That's who we are. And so I think that's a huge miss when it comes to these veteran programs. Start internally and go from there.
That's such a great point. And Brandon, I'm interested to ask you, because you come from the civilian side of the house. And I think what's so crucial for starting a veterans program, or if you're a veteran in your community, is get connected to people outside of the veterans community, because that's who you are going to be around with for the rest of your life. And it is critical, I think, for a veteran transition, whether it's in the workplace or it's just in family or friends or in their communities, that they build relationships outside of the veterans community. And so I want to know what drove you to want to help work within the veterans community, and what have you seen from veterans who are trying to apply to BP, maybe some advice for them as they look to join a company like BP?
No, thanks for the question. So let me kind of take a step back and give you my background and story. So being in BP, I'm also part of, we have these affinity groups, like I mentioned earlier. We call them BRGs, Business Resourcing Groups. And actually, I'm the national team lead for African-American BRG, right? But then part of my role in recruiting as well is to look at all of our diversity strands. And then I was looking at some of the questions that came about, and the answers that you guys gave is, the military is probably one of the most diverse environments out there, right? So if you can get it right from hiring veterans and military personnel, then by default, your other veteran strategy is going to also rise as well. So whether that's a disability, whether that's Hispanic, LGBT, African American, et cetera. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to get involved with the military recruitment efforts as well. And then also, at the end of the day, military personnel is the one. You weren't born in the military, right? So I was born African American. You were born a female. You were born this. You were born that, right? This is the only diversity strand that you volunteer for, right? So if you volunteer for that, why can't I not at least help you into your journey from from military background to the civilian world? Those were kind of two of the reasons why I wanted to join the our recruitment efforts when it comes to military hiring. But the second part of your question is around how can you, as someone transitioning out of the military, get through kind of the minutia of a large organization, right? Even as a civilian, you hear all the times that my resume goes to a black hole once I submit it. And also you hear as well as that, and if I'm being honest and frank right now, with what's going on with the environment last year, and individuals are kind of losing their jobs, unfortunately, a big company, you're going to get from one posting, you might get over 600 resumes, right? So how do you stand out from others when you're trying to work in a large organization like BP? A big part of it is networking. I say this all the time. When we talk about networking, you don't get instant results from networking. If I reach out to David today, I'm not going to get a job from him tomorrow. It's going to take time, 3, 4, 5 months. But you don't know what interaction with that individual will land you that role. That's one piece of it. Also, there are organizations out there that are aimed to help individuals transition out of the military. We keep talking about transition military personnel, but also there's retired military personnel that are maybe in their second or third career, right? There's organizations out there that can help, like a Next Ops or a Combined Arms or even the Skill Bridge program as well. And then I don't want to put this all on the veteran. As an organization, you have to be ready to embrace a veteran, right? As a recruiter, I think I'm pretty good. I can hire anyone, I think. But if we can't keep them within the organization, then what good is that for me to bring them in, right? So there are things that the employee will need to do, but also the employee will need to be military ready, I would say, for individuals coming through the organization.
So I'm gonna actually refer to one of the questions here in our side panel. I hope that's okay with y'all. You may have seen it pop up on your screen. It's the very top one there from Dominique Short, and I'll let y'all kind of jump in as you would like. The question here is, what are 3 things that we should focus on specifically in terms of bringing vets into the organization? I'll say it here one more time if you want to jump in, just so you can hear the question properly. What are the 3 things we should focus on specifically in terms of bringing vets into the organization?
I think one of the most important things out of all of them is to, in my opinion, is to truly make them feel that they are valued and that you're not just waving the flag. You get so many companies out there that say that they want to bring in the military, but they really have no science behind it. No, as Eddie said, vision behind it. They're just bringing somebody on, and they don't have any way of having that mentorship for the person, explaining to them how to, if they're a transitioning service member, how to transition into the civilian workforce. Because, as they transition, they're trying to figure out what their first name is again, because they forgot about it. 20 plus years, even 5 years, they've been called by their last name or by some nomenclature before their last name. So, having that and being able to communicate, having a true onboarding with them, having a buddy system. When we were in the military, we had like a person, as you became the new person, you had a special buddy that's attached with you along the way to help do that. Having somebody that has transitioned, or having a civilian also going back and forth and mentoring them, that's the important piece. If they don't feel like they're invited, they're going to be leaving as quickly as you brought them on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think one of the worst things that can happen on your onboarding is a veteran shows up for their first day ready to go. They're super excited to make a good impression. And you tell them, look, go sit over here. We don't have your desk ready. We don't have your computer ready. We don't have your key card ready. So just sit over here and read this manual. And that's the worst experience. The other thing that I think, and because I'm focused on skills, is that I think organizations really need to train their hiring managers and their HR professionals on skills that their organization needs. Because by understanding the skills that they need, not just the tasks they need done with the job, but the skills required for that job, they'll be able to look at a military resume and find those skills and dismiss and not be bogged down by all of the military language or the military experience, but the actual skills that candidate brings to the organization. So I think that's one of the biggest things that employers can focus on.
If I could just shift it to even more fundamental and practical, and I want to kind of come back and give credit where credit's due. Robyn said something very astute. Who are your existing veterans that are already in your organization, right? So I always think about the practical terms of what I think the person's asking. So what I think Robyn's pointing to, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, Robyn, but you got to get your baseline, and that's the fundamentals. And I had mentioned earlier about your baseline around the data. So who are your veterans in the organization first? How many of them are there? Where are they? Are they willing to be a part of this initiative to bring them in? Some of them are not going to be receptive to that. Some are going to say, you know what? I really don't want to be a part of that. My life's too busy, and I don't think it's smart for me to stick my head up and say I'm a veteran. And that does still exist. The other piece in this too is once you get the data piece, look for the low-hanging fruit. Look for the easiest opportunities to bring in a talent into your organization. If it's a very specific area that you're hiring in plenty, if you have the executive sponsorship, set yourself up for a success to bring the very first few in and build the momentum from there. So get your baseline so you know where you're going. What I see is a lot of people jump in with no strategy. They will go after stuff and say, well, let's just hire veterans. We'll attend a few of these, and we'll go to a couple of those, and we'll interview a few of these. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. And then they fail miserably at it and say, we don't know how to hire veterans. instead of having a very targeted strategy, understand where you're going based on that baseline and data, and then hitting it and steady. There's no magic to this. If you just hit that steady state and just keep putting points on the board and build over time, you'll hit that critical mass, and you'll have a program that will stand the test of time because you've shown the business value. You've got a great strategy in place. You started with the baseline. You knew the fundamentals of where you were going, and you knew where your low-hanging fruit was. So that's kind of where I coach it a lot for a lot of my clients when I do this from the startup all the way through world class, if that helps at all.
Yeah, I think also piggyback, Eddie, is highlight your successes. A lot of times when an organization, we are siloed, and we'll do things, a lot of good things, like in our own silos, but we don't, I guess, scream to the masses. So definitely highlight your successes. This way you can bring people on the journey along with you as well.
Yeah.
There's a good question here, if you don't mind me jumping in real quick, and it's a little bit outside of the starting a veterans program or building a veterans program, but I think it plays into the narrative. It's from Ariel here, and it says, it's not easy to network when you've never done it. What advice would you give to veterans who aren't used to asking for anything? What should they be asking so they feel comfortable and get results?
Oh, that's like multifaceted right there, and everybody's different.
We can spend a whole webinar on that one. Yeah, just alone.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you got to get out of your comfort zone, and it's just like in the interview process. You're built for so long in the military to talk about team this, team that, and you're having to reverse engineer yourself. And actually, you're talking about yourself now. You're selling yourself. You're pimping yourself out to basically
in a really good way,
to somebody in a positive way. Yes, in a very positive way, but you're still getting money. In the end. But you're doing it in a fashion where it's uncomfortable in the beginning. But the more that you do it, the more that you're speaking to people, the more that you're exercising that outreach and that networking, as Brandon talked about, networking is key. The more you do it, the easier it's going to be for you. You may start out like Ben Stein from Ferris Bueller, and then you're going to move into having your own voice and how to sell yourself. So you've got to be able to do that.
And I think that there's so many mechanisms out there today for networking. But for me, what we tell our service members and spouses that come to us is, you're not asking for somebody to get you a job when you're trying to network. You're just asking to connect with them. Maybe there's a similar, they're working for a company that you're interested in, or they're in an industry that you're interested in. Connect with them, have a conversation, get relationships. So it's not as scary if you think, I've got to connect with this person and I'm going to ask them to get me a job. That's not what you're doing. You're building out relationships with people, right? That can then connect you with other people. And the other thing that we always say is, I always tell them to, when you connect with somebody, connect on some sort of level. Either they were in the same branch of service you were in, or they went to the same school. Find a connective tissue there. But then also, respond to them and say, if there's anything I can do to help you, or if there's anybody in my network I can connect you with. Always that give as much as that take as well. So.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, Rob. And what I think is the underlying value of why we network, right? So it's antithetical to our DNA, and still to this day, we have a very hard time bragging about ourselves. I don't care how long I've lived, and to the detriment of my wife and running my own business, my own practice, and saying to ourselves, why do you keep giving it away all the time? It's like, listen, I pay it forward, but it always comes back to me in some way. And when you're able to position it that way, and people say, listen, I want to pay it forward, I want to help you, right? It's an impractical thinking because it doesn't pay off right away. But if you keep doing it that way, the long-term value of a powerful network, I have about 5,000 of my closest friends, and they will pick up the phone. Not all 5,000, a lot of them will, but they will pick up the phone and they will say, Eddie, what can I do for you? I remember way back when you did this, and that's the type of network you want. And that is achievable over time, but you have to be a little bit patient to get it.
So I think we're coming up here on our closing remarks. I think we have just a couple minutes left, and I appreciate you, David, Robyn, Eddie, and Brandon being on the panel with us today. I think a couple of y'all have put your information in the chat bar there, but if you would like folks to connect with you to follow up on further conversations, I think that would be great. And also just maybe wanted to ask in maybe just a couple or a few sentences, if you could provide us maybe some future expectations that you have for your employee research group, or things that you're actually looking forward to that you feel optimistic about within the veterans hiring space or starting a veterans program.
I'll go first.
Go ahead, Robyn.
Go ahead, Brandon.
No, go ahead. That's fine.
Well, obviously for me, at Veterans Ascend, we do not use a resume in our connecting with employers. And I really feel strongly as an HR professional as well that resumes need to go away. They're full of bias, perceptions, and just fraught with so many issues that we really need to focus on the skills that a company needs and the skills the candidates have. So that's the future that I would love to see, in getting away from and really getting back to those conversations about, we talked about bigger businesses having all those layers and how complicated it can be. It shouldn't be that complicated when you're trying to find the right talent for your organization. So get back to some of that simplistic one-on-one connections.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What I would say is, if you're trying to build out a veteran strategy or utilizing your ERG as well, just be mindful of it. All starts with data. A big piece of, I think one of the questions that I saw in the chat as well was around data, and I guess making it easy for the veteran to identify the veteran, right? One thing that we at VP, so we don't have it right. No matter how large a company we think we are, we don't always get it right. We are along our D&I journey as well. So when it comes to data, I think it's important that being able to share information that's appropriate, right? Because sometimes your BRG or ERGs, they have a full-time job, it's their volunteering role, so they're not privy to the same information you as HR professionals privy to, that's right. So have an understanding around what can be shared, how often can it be shared, and who can it be shared with as well. That'd be a big starting block to help you along your D&I and your veteran journey.
I would say instead of, you hear in the TAP, classes network. I mean, you hear network all the time. I'd like to change the narrative to engage. Reach out there and identify, those people that are willing to help. There's a lot of people on LinkedIn that you can reach out to. Coming to events like this to learn more, writing down names of people that are panelists, and just reaching out. Those that are truly wanting to engage with you, you'll be able to, learn a lot, and their connections can help lead into other things. Those are the type of people that I always love looking and working with.
The one thing I would say to the transitioning service members who may be listening to this, maybe they're not employers, but the strongest piece of advice I can give them, if I can just take a 20-second detour here, you have to master your reentry. I can't express that enough. Mastering your reentry, because there are 45,000 veteran serving organizations out there, but it's a very deeply fragmented ecosystem. I love what Robyn's doing. Part of her technology solution and the way she's approached things, very strategic, very specific, going towards profiles where skills are matched up, apples to apples, makes total sense. And I think really Robyn's on the bleeding edge of doing awesome, great work there. And she didn't pay me to say that, by the way. I just like what she's doing. Love what she's doing. But here's the other side of the coin. Mastering your reentry is so critical. Understanding your identity. It's really fundamentally comes around what your identity comes down to and how you adapt to that new civilian identity that really leads to that new civilian destiny of purpose, passion, and performance over time. That's the bookend of the supply side of talent. You get that right, and you will be a first choice premium talent in the marketplace. Conversely, though, I will say this. employers, to Brandon's earlier point, we need to step up and understand true value. And it really comes down to skills translation, but it also comes down to the cultural piece in this. What is the dynamic of your organization that speaks to and understands and embraces that value consistently over time? Because when it comes down to competing priorities, at the end of the day, a lot of times veteran programs will take a back seat and will not be resilient enough. So those two fundamentals, supply and demand, are very critical in this piece. And employers, I put my name in the chat there. People want to ping me later on to do that and talk. We'd love to have a conversation, but that's my 2 cents closing out.
Absolutely. I think that's a great place to table the conversation. Again, appreciate all of you all's really hard work and being on the front lines of starting veterans programs, growing veterans programs, and reaching out to the veterans community. It's a tremendous help, and it really encourages healthy transition back into civilian life after service in the military. For everyone in the audience, thank you much for being along with us and being a part of the conversation. And also thanks to our great friends, Carl and George at Vet Indexes. They are doing great work, and we're proud to be a part of their ecosystem and continue to support the great work they do. Until then, we'll talk to y'all next time. Have a good rest of your day.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody. Greatly appreciate that. Great panel, and thank you. So everybody who's in this current breakout session, who's either a participant or just listening in, what we're going to do now is we are indeed going to take another networking break that's going to be sponsored by Oracle, for the next 15 minutes. So there is a little navigation going on with this. You have to go back in out of your breakout session, and then there's the lobby where you can enter into that room where you can all do some networking. And then we'll come out and do the afternoon breakout sessions. Again, if anyone needs a hand, reach out directly to me, chat in the chat box. But that's where we're going to break to. Again, thank you all for the great panel. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Carl.
Take care.
All right. Take care now.